Mr. Jason Unruhe, a political commentator and analyst, is joining us via Skype out of Ontario. Jason, it's good to see you. Um, based on what I was reading, it seems to me that it would be very safe to say that the president basically has backtracked on all those steps that he was taking.
Accurate. When Elena Moreno was running for office, he came off as even further left than a social democrat. He had almost even started sounding like a socialist. Yet we see here now in his presidency, he has done a complete 180. He has done the opposite of basically everything it is that he said he was going to do. Obviously, it should not be shocking that a politician didn't keep their word, but he had instilled a lot of hope in a lot of disenfranchised, very many marginalized people, a marginalized country such as Ecuador. And yet he has done the opposite. He has turned the entire country over to the IMF. Everybody in the world, particularly Latin America, knows what happens when you make a deal with the devil, that being the International Monetary Fund. You may receive a great deal of funds to build some infrastructure inside the country, mostly ports, commercial areas supporting the foreign businesses that by law would have the right to come into the country at that point. And very little of that money actually finds its way down into the actual people who need it. And some of the demands by the IMF is essentially to cut any kind of social service that would help people in any way. If it can be monetized in some degree or another, or privatized, put in the hands of a private company, it should be cut. So it's absolutely not surprising in any way, shape, or form that they would make the demand that the fuel subsidies end, something that is very, very important to the people of Ecuador, not even just the regular everyday people, but a lot of the smaller businesses who don't wield the kind of capital that many of the foreign companies do are going to get devastated by this. And I think that that's all one of the tactics. Undermine these domestic businesses on behalf of the foreign transnational corporations, which are then going to move into the country with their foreign capital, which greatly dominates any kind of domestic business, which are further undermined by the lack of fuel subsidies. And essentially they can come in and take over the entire economy, essentially.
Right.
We've seen this time and time again, this kind of piling up the country, piling up countries with debt, and then essentially forcing the countries to sell off their natural resources, access to their markets, access to their labor power for many of the foreign companies as a way of paying them back for this. I mean, this is very much a predatory loan, and this has been done to virtually every single country in Latin America. And I think all of them have suffered from it at one point or another, with the exception of Cuba. Recently, the one example that is hated internationally is Venezuela, and they are the country that managed to pay off that debt and remove the IMF from the country, which is a great thing. If you're going to practice any kind of autonomy or freedom or control over your own resources, that's exactly what you're going to have to do. And I think that that's what Moreno was probably planning from the beginning. Give very much a popularist rhetoric, get into power, take the IMF loans, and essentially line his own pockets.
Jason, there is an option here for presidents and officials, and that is resign if you can't basically, push what you think is right for your country. But apart from that, I wish we could discuss that what can be done about, countries like Ecuador and the situations, and, the fact that you mentioned they have given the country, put it at the mercy of the IMF with basically reaching that deal. But that can't be done within our time. So what I would like to discuss with you is what do you think is going to happen? Because, the country, like you said, is going to go further down in debt. But, what surprises me, Jason, is that, everybody seems to be happy of reaching this deal.
Well, I'm not surprised that a lot of the higher-ups inside the government, many of the imperialist countries around the world are very, very happy about this, because it means they're going to be able to dig their claws into the country and scoop out the value that's created there and line their own pockets with it. This is a much more predatory version of capitalism. This is imperialism itself, and this is a new place that they can dig their claws into. Rafael Carrera, for whatever that you could certainly criticize him for, he wasn't perfect, but at least he generally tried to keep the country out of the hands of the predatory multinational banks, many of them, of course, deep in control with the United States and the use of the U.S. petrodollar, etc. I mean, this is about money, pure and simple. This is about control over resources, making sure that they don't or they can't be sold or used by someone who is in opposition to U.S. foreign policy, or particularly the bloc of the United States, the U.K., Saudi Arabia, Israel, etc. But this is primarily, first and foremost, about making money. There's some steps that the government could take, but they're probably not going to take them because they don't want to. I imagine there's probably going to be some level of pressure that would be necessary in order to do that. I mean, I've already seen reports that the leadership of the country have already fled the capital because of the protests. I mean, there's essentially a martial law in certain places because things have gotten out of control, and rightfully so. If you instigate something like this against people, if you take the poorest and most marginalized people, some of the poorest people in the world, and you take away what little they have left, then they have nothing left, and they have nothing left to lose. This is almost Econ 101, that if you leave people in a desperate enough position, they're going to become extremely violent towards those who put them in this situation. I do believe that it's possible that they could pressure the government into possibly making a better deal or not going to the IMF. But time will tell exactly how much effort it'll take and if it can be done at all.
Exactly. We'll see what happens. Thank you very much, Jason Unruhe, political commentator and analyst via Skype out of Ontario.